ultimately with the goal of making things better for your preparedness and for your response to disasters. So again, like what we've seen in success is when you actually plan these multi-year exercise strategy where you have, say, in the next 2 to 5 years, here's what we're going to do to better prepare, starting with maybe something small and easy and working towards something more complicated, like a functional or full scale. Next slide. So when we talk about why we should exercise, again, I think the traditional emergency manager would tell you it's to test or validate your plan. Well, you don't always have a plan. Sometimes something's about to happen, or there's a new hazard or a new concern that you're worried about, and you need to develop the plan. But you can use it an exercise as a way to identify those gaps and vulnerabilities. In the world where I work in maritime emergency preparedness right now, we've created new threats and hazards just by our intent to do good. So with a lot of the carbon neutral shipping focus on low sulfur fuel oils, alternative fuels like ammonia and electric batteries, while those are being done for global climate change reasons, they're creating new hazards in the maritime industry. We're not capable of putting out fires on ships that have electric batteries or ships that are carrying Teslas that are full of electric batteries. So exercises are a good way, even though we may not have these plans yet, those exercises can help identify what are our gaps and vulnerabilities. And then to evaluate new capabilities, I just heard that Thailand has just been certified with a medium search and rescue team. And so that's an international certification process that requires training, but then they have to conduct an exercise to show that that capability meets the standard. So again, many different applications of exercises. And then I think the most important one is that improved coordination and building public trust. There's a saying that you don't want to meet someone for the first time during a disaster, and that you should exchange business cards before the disaster. And so exercises are a great way to invite a new partner, a new NGO or community partner, or perhaps while you're conducting the exercise, you recognize that someone's missing. That needs to be part of that conversation for future exercises. So exercises are not all the same. There's generally 2 types of exercises. They're called discussion-based or operations-based. Discussion-based is what it sounds like. It's an exercise where it's primarily people sitting around a table and having a conversation about something. And those start with seminars and workshops and move up to a tabletop. A seminar and a workshop is often less scripted, and it's more to explore a topic. You can have a seminar. I mentioned the emerging fuels in maritime industry. You can have a seminar just to learn from experts on what those types of fuels are, how they behave in the environment. You could have a workshop to learn about an emerging hazard. Maybe it's a public health risk, and you need some science or medical expertise to share the latest research. And so those are the kind of the building blocks, as we call them, towards moving to a more complicated exercise at the tabletop level. Then when you get into operations-based exercises, you're looking at exercises where you're actually putting people into the field to conduct some type of operation or to practice some type of skill. And that's when you see the ones on TV where the firefighters or the USAR teams are out actually doing things, practicing rescue, practicing medical care. But with this, as you can see on the slide, the closer you get to the functional and full scale, the more time you need and the more resources and money it takes to be successful. So for tabletop exercises, generally, depending on how complicated they are, 3 to 6 months is enough planning time. But when you're getting to a full scale exercise, you probably need a year or more of planning and a large team to be successful. So with that, I think the focus of this conversation is more on those tabletop exercises. Actually, tabletop exercises originated in the 19th century in Prussia. The word Kriegspiel in German, which basically means like war game or war playing, is where the actual idea of practicing tactics before a war. And then it evolved into tabletop, and you can see this this image is actually a wildland fire tabletop. It's actually how wildland firefighters practice their tactics. It's called a sand table, and that's kind of the idea. We've turned it into a conference table, but traditionally it is kind of standing around and moving things on the table. So very easy to do generally, doesn't cost a lot. It can be big or small. And the most important thing about tabletops is it's conducted in a no-fault environment. So people and participants should feel free to be open, be vulnerable to their gaps and lack of knowledge, because they're being evaluated on the plans and procedures and capabilities, not on their individual performances. And then again, as I said, various formats. We've seen a lot of success in virtual and hybrid tabletops now, after the pandemic, when most of our work in all of emergency management became virtual work. So it can be an in-person or a virtual event. And so I guess my last slide that I really want to focus on, the evaluation and improvement planning is really the most important piece of exercises, because that's where you're going to identify those gaps and try to develop a corrective action or an improvement plan, which is basically a plan saying these are the things we're going to do to try to address those gaps that we identified. So when you're building your tabletop exercise, you want to have a really good data collection plan, whether it's actual evaluators sitting in the room. You could have participant surveys where you gather that information, or you just do a hot wash around the table. But it's really important to define that in advance. And then you get into your after action review and report, which is the document that explains how the exercise was performed and also the follow-up activities. And then finally, you develop a corrective action list where we really get at root cause. And I think that's my experience, the step that we often skip. You know, if the example is that the early warning messages were not received by the community, it could be a problem with technology. It could be a problem with the language is used. It could be a problem with a lot of different things. And so going through that root cause analysis to try to actually find out what was the issue. Maybe there's a training issue. Maybe the person who's responsible for that message didn't understand the timeline for sending out that early warning message. So really driving into those root causes is really important. There's a lot of different ways to do that. This is actually a fishbone diagram, which is a really interesting way. So in that outcome box, you would say the community did not receive the early warning message, and then you would fishbone all the potential reasons, whether it's related to the plan or training or the equipment. I think that's my last slide. Yeah, so that was just really just a big picture view of exercises as a topic. And I guess, Mary, you're going to talk more about the bank.
Yeah. Kevin, can I just ask one thing? Because I see it everywhere and I just want to make sure I understand, and maybe not everybody knows. Can you explain the hot wash?
Yes.
Because I've seen hot wash referred to and I was too afraid to ask, but in this group I will ask.
Yeah, so a hot wash, an example here, the folks that just put on this presentation, when you guys all leave, we might stay here and say what went well and what could be improved. So it's basically just the participants and the activity and the exercise. And it's hot wash because you want it to be fresh. What's in your mind right now?
Yeah.
So that you can document it now. And then in a few weeks, we'll start working on the after action, which is where you actually look at the surveys and the evaluator reports and all the data analysis. So it's just a way to capture information quickly.
Yeah.
Great.
Over to you, Mary.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I'm going to bring it down to the bank and sharing information as if you are all TTLs that want to conduct these rapid preparedness assessments and tabletop exercises with your clients. I'm a senior DRM specialist and in the global unit for resilience and disaster management for the next month. Yeah. And I lead the global program for emergency preparedness and response, co-lead the community of practice on emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. Sorry. Next slide, Gemma. Okay, so a few months ago, we released this guidance called Guidelines for Rapid Emergency Preparedness Assessments. Why did we do it? Because TTLs continue to request EP&R assessments. They're very popular around the world. They can help you prep for an EP&R intensive IPF or other type of maybe CAT DDO to recognize policy improvements. And these EP&R assessments, I won't go into them in detail, but you can see on our website, we've got ready to respond assessments, lessons learned exercises, which are large, like 360 data point assessments of EP&R capacities. And then we have CPGAs, which are higher level cross-sectoral evaluations of crisis preparedness, but they're costly and time intensive. They could cost up to $150,000 and take 6 to 9 months. They're great when you can invest the time and money to do it, but if you got to do something quick and dirty, rapid preparedness assessments are helpful. And if you come out of it with a scorecard of the 30 or 60 questions that we've drilled down the scorecard to, taken from the R2R, then we can start building global baselines of preparedness capacity and in kind of corporate speak, show why investments in preparedness are so important. And also the CERPs were being rolled out, as you all know, and there's gives countries a huge funding potential they didn't have before, but there's a fuzzy mandate for how we should be preparing countries to use this financing and building their capacity. And like Kevin mentioned, they serve a dual purpose because not only can you assess gaps and bottlenecks in EP&R systems and help the clients figure out what they are, but you're also building readiness for disaster response and in bank terms for CERC or CERP activation, and so you can do it quickly and your CMU is not upset with you. Next slide. Okay, so the simulations within rapid preparedness assessments, the guidance in the report that I just referred to presents modular components. So we've got the simulations alongside a readiness scorecard of 90 or 30 questions, and then the preparedness diagnostic brief or report that you can pulls all the findings together. You can decide if you want to do all three, if you only have time for a simulation, or if you just want to take time and do a readiness scorecard. And we could do that without the simulation by interviewing people and doing desk reviews. But having a simulation in there really validates and deepens the findings. So if the simulation is standalone, you can do it at any stage of your project preparation, really to engage on preparedness or reinforce existing practices. And they can be useful for CERP, IPFs with CERCs. And I started doing simulations with CERCs 10 years ago. If Karen's in the room, or Karen Charles is listening, she was the one who taught me you need to do country simulations with your CERCs to make sure they're ready to go in any IPF at least once a year. And then even on CAT DDOs, I've finished negotiations in CAT DDOs and then walked into the Minister of Finance office and say, okay, if a disaster happens tomorrow, how do you activate it? And they have no clue. So even on CAT DDOs, it's important to have that dialogue and kind of activation simulation. And there's always an opportunity for TTLs to take stock of preparedness capacity. And you can do it year on year and understand where there's been growth. Go ahead, Gemma. Thanks. Okay, so how do you decide a simulation structure? And this is the question we get the most. Like the guidelines lay out a nice 2-day simulation with coffee breaks and like morning and afternoon sessions. Sometimes you don't have that much time. You've got an afternoon during a mission. Also, you can decide if it's a broad EP&R simulation that really looks at full preparedness capacity, or it's only CERP specific, and that can help you understand your how you should really structure it. So also thinking about how much time and money you have to devote to it. If you have only one afternoon free, what are the priorities? Should it be focused on CERC or CERP? Or do you have time to run them through an identified priority like legal institutional roles or maybe health system integration into response, something like that? Also thinking about your client capacity. If you're primarily working with a PIU that's unrelated to the DRM agency, what's important for them to know for either general emergency preparedness and response by working with the disaster management agency, or if it's just focused on CERP, what is the most important information for them to have, and what are the things that they need to practice. And also thinking about the World Bank's value add, and I wrote ensuring it's demand driven. We all know that our work is demand driven. I try to make it so, but I put this picture of Jordan here because Jordan is a country that they do regional, wide-scale military simulations of disaster response, and they're very well organized. So the bank coming to Jordan and saying, we're going to do simulation on disaster response, not exactly a value add, but we can, if it's for a CERP, great. And so we build on their existing knowledge and make it suit their needs. But of course, broader preparedness simulations are very important in lower capacity countries that don't already have the resources to do their own simulations. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is really about taking time to prepare if you have it. Preparing the simulation, the more time you put into it, the better it's probably going to come out. Define the scope and objectives. Identify early if we're going to do it broad EP&R or CERC specific and CERP specific. Sorry, I wrote CERC and CERP, I think, interchangeably in this, but whenever I say CERC, I also mean CERC and or CERP. And those two aren't mutually exclusive, because to do a CERP specific activation simulation, you still need to have a scenario of a disaster. You still need to understand what are the communication channels in making decisions. You still need to understand what are the actual activities that you're going to decide on and how they relate to disaster response. Are they in the positive list? And so they're not mutually exclusive, but you should have these thoughts early. Then start building the planning team. Sometimes it's only the task team, but I would strongly encourage you to work with the PIUs and the agencies, your client counterparts, to help you plan this, because they know the situations that are relevant to them. They know the issues that they're struggling with. They know who should be in the room, and you're also there to help suggest who should be in the room. If they work in a silo, you can help them broaden and invite health, invite social protection, etc. And you should have some roles clearly laid out in advance in terms of who's going to actually facilitate the tabletop exercise, who's going to be sitting on the side as evaluators, not just sitting on the side, but maybe they're doing a joint role of doing the scenario injects, like they're observing and facilitating and helping the smaller groups do their work, but they're also asking questions like, does that communication channel that you just described actually function? Or you mentioned that you're going to call so-and-so from finance. Who is that? Like, what information are you trying to get from them? And is that written in policy? So having people within your task teams and also within the broader client engagement group that you're with to kind of build the roles and who's going to facilitate the exercise. Absolutely, we should, if it's focused on CERP specific activation, make sure that everybody in the CERP manual is in the room. So the CERP manual clearly lays out the implementation structures. They all need to be in the room if possible. And making sure people are there who understand institutional processes and mandates and who actually are in the weeds sometimes, because if you have PSs and permanent secretaries and political appointees, they might not know how things have worked in the past. So making sure you have people there who are actually a mix of higher level people to bring the political clout and the importance of this, but also the mid-level people who actually are doing the work in the ground. Next slide, please. Okay, developing the scenario and the injects. So once you have your team in place and who should be in the room, you can use that group or a small subset of that group to come up with your scenario. Lots of possibilities. And of course, you can do a health specific scenario, but at that point, the health team should be in the room and probably leading the engagement. Or you can do a conflict scenario, but then I think we're talking about natural hazard related disasters because that's what we know. And it's a good place to start, but you can absolutely go outside the box. So when you decide your scenario, say it's flood, you can start unfolding it in stages. So having the first stage be like, okay, there's and this could be information that you give to people coming into in advance, people coming into the simulation. There's been increased rainfall. The Hydromet Agency is giving a warning. They're probably going to activate the early warning system soon. Here's the situation, building the tension a little bit, and then you can start the simulation of like, okay, there's been activation of early warning system, and there is many roads are blocked with debris, and there are reports of people stranded in this location and what needs to happen in those first 24 hours. But then once you kind of solve problem by problem and think of then inject or move to the different phase of the scenario. So once you talk about your actions in the initial 24 hours, then move to, okay, it's 48 hours later. The roads are still blocked, water is still rising, electricity has gone out in the main public hospital, and you're getting requests from international community if they should be invited to come be there. And so interjecting all of these things that governments have to be concerned with to help them stay on their toes and keep it a real life scenario. Because in a lot of these situations, there are going to be many international partners coming in, and a big part of EP&R in our country is who leads the coordination of that? Is your NDMA agency capable of coordinating that response and capable of doing rapid needs assessments and things like that to get information to the Prime Minister, for example? So those are the types of injects you can add, but keep it we suggest keeping it phase-based. And the final phase could be, okay, now what instruments should we activate? And who in the room knows what the instruments are? Maybe it's only finance. Maybe disaster management agencies doesn't even know that there's a CAT DDO. Or obviously, if it's a CERP operation, they know there's a CERP. How do they make a decision to access it? How much money are they going to get? Things like that. So for our situation, I think at least the last scenario should always be the financial decision-making scenario. Okay, I think I went into some of this before. If the simulation is very CERP specific, you can go there, son. Then put a lot of intentional time into the aspects that slow activation and implementation. That's decision-making on what the activities are going to be. Who has the authority to make the decision on this as per the manual? What intel supports it? Have you done needs assessment? Why is this decision being made? Have some transparency. Emergency procurement procedures, huge. And we're putting out new guidelines soon where we're going to recommend, simulating procurement of different types of goods and services, showing where the gaps are, getting people together to procure, rice and oil at one table, and then procuring excavators at another table, or excavator services, and then who's going to be in charge of debris cleanup and things like that. So walking through different types of goods or services procurement and seeing that they can do it quickly. And of course, financial management. So this is why it's so important if you're doing a CERP specific simulation to include your FM people from the get-go and make sure they're a part of designing simulation, because they have the real life experience and advice to say, okay, this would be an appropriate scenario. And especially ESF specialists, because they're going to have to be socialized as to what's in the positive list. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so exercise delivery. When you're getting ready to deliver, you should always have a nice packet of information to share in advance with the participants. Doesn't have to be the full scenario. Don't give away all of the fun stuff early on, but give some of the background country context that they mostly know, and then share the information on the roles and procedures of the exercise, share that this is a low stress, open environment, non-judgmental, not recorded, maybe things like that. And then during the exercise, stage by stage, you're facilitating a participatory but structured discussion during each phase of the simulation. What happens operationally? Who's leading this stuff? What information is needed? And the facilitator is going to be talking, but also break it up a bit and do, group exercises here and report back, things like that. I mean, most of you know how to run a workshop or to keep people engaged, keep it participatory. Next slide, please. And this is an important part of exercise delivery because it doesn't just start at wrap up. During the exercise, you should have evaluators that are either sitting on the side observing and or part of it facilitating, and they might have that 30 or 90 question scorecard in front of them, and they're tracking conversations of, okay, this communication is not going well. It looks like they don't really have facilities nearby that are stocked, or it looks like they don't have equipment that fits well for all of their search and rescue people or something. So the evaluators and facilitators are taking notes during the exercise, and then when you wrap up the scenario, I actually replaced the word hot wash with wrap up conversation.
Okay.
Just because I didn't want to get into the hot wash discussion, but not get into it, but I knew it was going to be a question. Conduct a hot wash with participants while they're still in the room to get their reflections on their gaps and good practices, and capture CERP readiness improvements or where anything that needs to be changed in the manual or further clarified with Minister of Finance and things like that. And then after participants have left, evaluators stay in the room and the exercise group stays in the room to really do the evaluation in a structured way. We recommend evaluation templates if you have the time to put those together so that everyone's findings can be documented about interagency coordination, facility, logistics, personnel constraints, gaps in financial and procurement preparedness, and of course, gender and social inclusion considerations. And then, depending on what you would like to deliver with this, you're either going to strengthen the readiness scorecard or the diagnostic brief with these outputs. Is that it? Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm going to stop there and hand it over to two great TTLs who have actually done this in the field and see what their experiences were like. And I think they're each going to share a couple minutes about their experience, then we can open up for questions.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Diana Tello, Senior Urban Specialist in the Africa East and South region. And I'm going to share the experience of conducting the tabletop exercise for CERP, specifically in Burundi. So for those who don't know, Burundi is a small country in the middle of Africa. It's also one of the poorest countries in the world that on the one hand has very weak EP&R capacities, and on the other is highly exposed to floods, displaced population from neighbor countries, and many other shocks. So on April of this year, it was the fourth country to have a CERP in the bank. And from there, we started, seeing how we can make it operational, in case it could get activated, because there's a high chance it would get activated anytime now. The rainy season started, so it's available. So we decided to run a tabletop exercise in September. And there was a lot, we had a time to prepare and to coordinate with everyone. So that was very helpful. And we decided to do it CERP specific, because precisely going into a broader EP&R would take way more time and capacity building, etc. So it happened in September. It had a great turnout. More than 50 people from all the ministries involved in EP&R in the country, including PIUs of all the institutional arrangements set up that we had for the CERP. And of course, the World Bank team, no, it was a lot of people involved in the preparation. Candice was there leading on the ground. Nicole, Gemma, Mary, Zoe, Abby, a lot of people contributed to the organization of the event. And also locally, our team, Eve, Sammy, we put a lot of effort on ensuring that communication arrived to every single institution that was relevant for the CERP activation, that was part of the eligible activities that the CERP could finance if it gets activated. The result is that we gather more than 50 people across different ministries and technical expertise. So then what happened? No? And it's very linked to what Kevin and Mary were saying. Maybe we go to the next slide. So a lot of them didn't even know each other. No? So they never have talked to each other before. Of course, many of them didn't know about CERP or what it was, how it worked. So it was basically going from explaining what the CERP is, but also it enabled this coordination and between different ministries, clarifying who does what. People got motivated to even learn how their government and other entities worked, or what are their responsibilities in case there is an emergency. So the exercise was focused in this case on floods, because it was run by the DRM and urban team. But of course, because of Burundi and its context, it can get activated because of many other shocks. But we focus on floods, and the whole material was provided to participants. It was not very practical exercise to set up the scenario, but then also to understand what is needed specifically to activate CERP. So all documentations, manuals, response plan, etc., etc. So we invested a lot of time also on each of these documents. And because all PIUs were there, also including the bank team, the FM specialists, the procurement specialists, ENS colleagues, to see that everyone had the same information and that everyone was participating and involved. So the third thing, so they at the end of this, it was a 2-day workshop, and it was clear not only what CERP was, which was of course the main objective, but also a lot of the gaps and needs beyond CERP. So because the discussion went, of course, beyond the instrument, but into EP&R. So what some very clear gaps in mandates, for instance, in communication channels, that they didn't know who they needed to talk to in case there's an emergency, and so on and so on. So just to wrap up and don't take more time, maybe we go to the last slide. Yeah, so first, we felt that government ownership, enthusiasm on being there together, collaborating. It promoted broader discussions beyond the CERP. And of course, the ultimate objective was to understand how the CERP could get activated. And it laid out very specific next steps on what do we need to do after that. So one, for instance, is building these SOPs. So these operational procedures by sector, by ministry, to understand and have somewhere written, who needs to do what, when, etc. Some framework agreements for rapid procurement in case we are there. And the third thing is capacity building. So continue not only on the CERP and FM procurement ENS, but also on EP&R. It gave very clear the pointers on what to do next. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anchalan, and I'm the TTL for the Burkina Faso CERP, so I will also speak about that. I'm an economist by training, so I want to tell you that Actually, the EP&R work is really fascinating for two reasons. One is whenever you have a disaster or an emergency, that's where you see market failures kick in immediately. You have information gaps, you have coordination issues. So overall, not only through the instrument of the CERP, but broader EP&R initiatives are so important in not only preparing governments on how to respond and kind of building this muscle memory from if anyone's taken SAFE training, you recall that they tell you about muscle memory, right? So it's not just about that, but very much like Kevin, Mary, and Diana were saying, test driving the current systems to see where are the gaps and where are, say, things working okay for now, but the moment an emergency strikes, it's going to start to crumble. So really, I think that's really where emergency preparedness and response and CERP is so important. Additionally, I like the allocative efficiency of a CERP. If there's a problem that's money already sitting, it's 10% of balances that are undispersed. So it's a new instrument. I think it gives governments greater flexibility. But of course, it's not just about the financing element, right? So yes, that's money that can move, but it's really all of this preparedness work on how can you actually effectively respond to this emergency. And Sarah was with me. She conducted the CERP exercise with me, and we were talking about if a project, say, doesn't move things immediately, it's annoying. But if a CERP does not move things immediately, people die, right? So there's additional pressure to deliver and to perform well. So I think these preparedness aspects come in really well. Now on Burkina, so it's one of the countries in the Sahel, very climate stressed, dealing with a massive humanitarian crisis. Roughly 2.3 million IDPs. It is exposed, of course, to also climate disasters, droughts and floods being the most prevalent. The 2020 and 2021 droughts alone affected roughly 6.5 million people out of a total population of 23 million. So this is, it's very, very climate stressed country that also faces a humanitarian crisis, rapid urbanization happening that's largely unplanned, uncontrolled. So you see this mix of factors come in, and similar to what Diana said, we were also worried that rainy season hits and we're going to need to potentially activate this instrument that the government requested for. At the same time, unfortunately, we had a very short runway between approval, which was early August, and the simulation exercise, which was middle of September. And there was a bit of a trade-off here. We could have waited longer to do a better exercise, but we thought that it is better to do some kind of simulation early than to not do a simulation. And so there was that trade-off. Would I recommend it? It really depends on you, your country, your scenario. But for us, that was the right call. Doing something was better than doing nothing, even if it was not as prepared. I think in terms of the simulation, so again, our simulation was very much focused on the instrument itself, but did get into the different preparedness aspects, particularly those that were already noted in the CERP manual. So that was very helpful, and I think that provided good structure to that conversation. We had aimed for the 2-day CERP simulation, but things happen, key people are not available. So we ended up negotiating down to a day and a half, and it ended up being a day and a quarter finally. So, we lost some time, but on the bright side, we got the DG from the Ministry of Finance co-leading it with us. So we lost some, but we gained some. And I think having that type of government time and attention to such an important issue was really important, and it showed ownership and commitment on their part. I think the benefits of the CERP simulation exercise, number one, it was bringing everybody on the same page. And very much like you said, there were people who were, in the manual, their agencies are in the manual, but don't necessarily know what a CERP is or what their role is. And I think just this ability to bring everybody on the CERP, on the same page. And in fact, there were a few actors who had never received the CERP manual. So they knew about it because they had contributed to it, but they had never seen the final version. So even just the basic mechanics of this exists, this is what your role is in it, and this is what it hopes to deliver. I think that was incredibly helpful. Another thing that I think was a big positive out of the tabletop exercise there was a lot of discussion on the existing internal mechanisms within Burkina, and some of them were quite strong. And we found out that we actually need to reflect them better in the manual, that they were perhaps under reflected in their importance in the manual. And I thought that was a really good lesson, not just for us as the bank, because, you know, in the preparation phase, it's boom, boom, boom to the deadline, right? So I thought that was an important lesson for us as the bank, but also more importantly for the government to recognize what their EP&R capacity actually is and what are the different mechanisms that exist, but perhaps are, you know, due to mandate issues or coordination problems not adequately coming together. So in a way, that simulation exercise told us that, oh, we need to do a better job at reflecting the interconnectedness of these existing mechanisms in the manual. A third very important thing, which I think it's a bit related to bank processes, but still quite important from the point of view of a CERP. We saw that there was a lot of healthy debate and discussion among government counterparts on should we activate, should we not activate. We went with a, let's call it a mix of a scenario. We had an emergency alert go out about a flood. Flood hits a week later. First people go missing, then people are dead. Then we had an electricity grid closure. And their most important highway get closed, right? So we kind of kept upping the ante through these injects that Mary was talking about. And you could see that, you know, at first that, oh, we don't really need to, but oh, maybe now we do. So that kind of thinking was coming out, which was really interesting to observe. But what I thought was so interesting was that there were times where one ministry was ready to go and say, oh, no, we need this. And the others were like, no, but we haven't exhausted our internal options. So what that led to was this point on the director, the DG, it's a Director General of Cooperation, which is the main counterpart the bank has in Burkina and the Ministry of Finance, needs to be, and that is the bank-facing counterpart and implementing agency. But the fact that their role is that they are the final decision maker on whether or not the CERP will be triggered or activated was very important. I think that those debates really highlighted that the different agencies needed to provide sufficient evidence to DG CUP, essentially, and then DG CUP would then coordinate with the bank and, you know, choose to activate the CERP. So I thought that was really interesting, and that also clarified not only the role of the DG CUP within the CERP mechanism, and of course the PIU, but how the different ministries needed to coordinate internally. So that was you know, yes, there's a CERP, yes, there's a bank process and all of that, but the fact that they got this chance to debate their internal mechanisms of who provides data on what, when, how, all of that was really, really interesting. One other issue that we discovered was the emergency procurement process, right? So emergency response will go at the speed of emergency procurement, essentially. That was the big lesson. And yes, we had these things in the positive list. But okay, what if you have food on your positive list, but not the ability to move it? Right? So you maybe need to think of logistics and trucks and things like that. And then what are the procurement procedures? Let's say you have food, but you don't have medical kits and you need medical kits as well. How quickly can you mobilize, and who are, say, providers who are able to come in quickly? So that's something that we're trying to develop into this and give special focus and attention to that procurement and logistical aspect through improvements in the manual. I would say that, you know, if I went at it with a hot wash approach, so I think government ownership, the fact that everybody got to sit together, debate these things in a safe environment, and stress test some of their own systems was really helpful. What I wish could have gone better, I think time could have been a friend. Time was not. I think if I had to do it all over again, I would probably do it a bit differently. We did get good attendance, 50 plus people, but, you know, we had to, of course, go in and ask for some right people to come. And then on day two, as I recall, when we announced the closure of Route Nationale Une in the country, we realized that the transport folks were missing from the room. So, you know, the fact that mid to the simulation, maybe show up a day. So, yeah. It's not always possible. People have other priorities. And of course, it's not a real emergency. So, you know, you kind of don't always get the right people in the room. But I think we were able to stress that because the ministry realized that, oh, we can't make this decision without the transport folks in the room. So, so those are some of the things that, you know, could have gone better. And certainly we're hoping to do another simulation. So very much like what you said, we want to do once a year. And in fact, because the CERP has an ISR requirement, it's
Exactly.
something, yes, it's something that you can do and then report back in the ISR. And particularly, the most useful thing coming out of the CERP for us was that we have a list of changes that we will be implementing in the manual. We, of course, have identified some other potential activities which require more funding, but within the funding that is available, update the manual, make sure the government adopts the updated manual because otherwise it doesn't count. But all of that is in the works, and I think that to me would be the biggest value out of the CERP simulation exercise. I'll stop here.
No, thank you to all the speakers. A lot of commonalities too. I know it's Africa East and West, so of course a bit different, but interesting to hear on the institutional arrangements, the procurement, bottom line, and understanding who's in charge of what, really to make sure that things move when the CERP. I think it's also a reputational risk for the bank. I mean, of course, lives lost is bottom line, but we want to make sure for our clients, we've been also promoting the toolkit. We want to make sure these instruments work to their benefit to the extent possible. So are there any questions? Maybe we start online. I think, Gemma, you guys are connected. I don't know if any hands are raised or any comments in the chat. Or in the room. I don't know if anybody has any.
Oh, Felipe.
Felipe. Dale, Felipe.
Yes. Hi, hello everybody. No, super interesting presentation. I guess I have two comments / questions. I think maybe they're more for Mary and Zoe, but like really whoever wants to jump in. So in the preparation of the CERP that I'm leading in Guinea-Bissau, something that kind of like came afloat is, okay, yes, we need to prepare the government to implement the CERP if it's activated, but we also need to prepare the bank to know what a CERP is and how a CERP works. And that was really salient, how, again, it is a new instrument, but how we lack the knowledge, particularly on the fiduciary side, what pertains to financial management and procurement, on how the instrument works, the type of instruments we need to prepare. And it kind of like made me think if the CERPs that we've approved so far, we're basically just copy pasting Malawi's and then like improving it as we go further. And so I guess the question is, how are we, again, I'm not saying we should do a simulation or a tabletop exercise at the bank, but maybe because I'm kind of scared that we are preparing the government, but then we don't know inside the bank, I don't know what the disbursement letter should look like or how to update the procurement plan, or if we're talking about a ESMP or ESMF, you know, like things that our colleagues are kind of like on the fiduciary side are just basically approving because we are rushing them. And then that this knowledge is not funneling inside the bank. So that's kind of like my comment / question. The other one is, Mary, you discussed about simulation on CAT DDOs, and I found that super interesting, and it could address a problem that I'm having in Gambia. How does a simulation on a CAT DDO work? Because again, there's no positive list. It's quite some relatively streamlined process within the bank. We just received the declaration of emergency. We disbursed by. So how does that look like to see if I can use you for something? Thanks.
Yeah. So on the first question, before it leaves my brain, I think a bank-wide simulation would be awesome. Take over the 7th floor and do like a live action functional, like there's the CMU and there's but no, Felipe, I totally agree. I've been working a lot in Africa West, providing cross support and helping to think about preparing CERPs in Nigeria and RRO prep in Liberia, and country offices did not get the memo, and a lot of times, like, or have not been fully immersed in it like we have in DC. And so I've, to the extent possible, when you travel, please take the opportunity to do a country office BBL. And just work with OPCS if you'd like to. They should be invited, and just do another quick session where you're talking about the RO, the CERP, the CAT DDO, blah, blah, blah. It's not a huge time commitment. And I think it's one huge thing we need to do to get everyone on board. I'm also asking OPCS to be more intentional on their information and training of procurement staff and ESF and FM in the field, so that they're also on board and know what to expect when it comes to how this differentiates from a CERP where there's a positive list. This is a list of eligible activities versus a CAT, so getting all of them on board, because we need to pull them for their advice in the CERP manual. I think there should be more, as the CERP is evolving, this could be the team that is also leading the call for more internal bank education on it. In terms of CAT DDO simulation, it's more about the decision-making processes leading up to it. So if the trigger for your CAT DDO is a declaration of emergency, what is the process of pulling together the executive council that can trigger the emergency powers clause, and getting together the decision makers who not just decision makers, but also the disaster management agencies who'd be feeding information into the executive council who's making decisions on this. So having a simulation that includes the top decision makers on whether to declare an emergency or public health emergency in the same room, and give them a scenario and talk about, would you declare an emergency to activate, and the trade-offs of declaring emergency politically, and socially, that a lot of countries have, versus getting access to the money, because that's a real concern for a lot of countries. And so having a chance to sit down and talk about declaring an emergency and what goes into that, but then also even the process of writing a letter to the World Bank that asks for a specific amount, and the financial admin of the CAT DDO is needed as well. So yeah, and obviously you can't help them decide what to spend the money on. But the point there is you should have good enough relations with your Minister of Finance that they're going to want to tell you what they spent the money on, because in a lot of cases, if it was a positive result, then no, you can't ask them, but hopefully they'll tell you.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm from the Caribbean Country Management Unit, and I'm the only one in DC, and I do monitoring and tracking of all our CPRTs for the Caribbean countries, and the uptake is, we have, 8 countries, CRDC, RROs, and we have 7 countries doing CAT DDOs. So that's a lot going on, but I've never even heard of simulation, and I'm from the CMU, and we have, for example, the OECS countries, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean Countries, and of which St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Grenada fully utilized during Beryl the CAT DDO and drew down 20 million. And now we have Melissa in Jamaica, for which we've been very busy. So dealing with these small countries, and I'm thinking we don't have any CERP. One CERP might be coming in one of the only FCD countries in our region. Is this something that requires CMU budget to do simulation, because our WPA is very, very tiny? Is it something that is going to be made mandatory, doing simulation, especially with countries with low capacity? And I know, thanks to you guys, you will lead it. Is this something during annual or spring meetings you can have, like the way IDA does outreach? Would you be doing an outreach maybe during the spring meetings, which would be very helpful, because our countries are not, and maybe we have to do something regional. I'm sorry, a lot of different thoughts, but.
Okay, I'll try to answer quickly. On the Caribbean, I'm working with Jack closely on prepping the Haiti one, and potentially even Jamaica, and very familiar with the region. I came from LAC to the global unit, so tons of potential there to build off of the CAT DDOs, etc. In terms of funding to do this, there's no. I mean, yes and no. There's funding, but we have to kind of be scrappy about it and pull it together. So we just released and wrapped up selection for a small grants program of 50K from Japan funds. We have another donor, Canada's interested in supporting more work on this. I think that small grants for this will continue to come, but the big push that's above my pay grade is the fact that the bank should be prioritizing this work through making funding for this more accessible at the
Mary, can I add something to that? So the Sahel CMU, this is where Burkina falls, was the only CMU that gave implementation money for the CERPs. And I think it's partly because of the conflict situation, the climate issues, right? But what we were able to do, actually, we were able to leverage the very small BB that they gave us to get the PHRD grant that allowed us to do the first simulation. And we're hoping that, we can leverage the CMU money a bit more. So actually, I would say it goes a long way, because that shows that CMU has skin in the game, and that lets TTLs like me go to grants and say, look, we do have matching funds or whatever the grant requirements are, and we can do more with that money if that money exists in the first place. Yeah.
And in terms of just the last question, in terms of like leading it and supporting countries to do it, like we don't have to be the ones leading it. There's lots of people like expert consultants like Kevin and other consultants who with a lot of experience in the actual emergency management field that can really facilitate these technical kinds of simulations. But also our staff like Sarah and Gemma and Nicole and myself and can all support facilitation of this and be kind of deployed on a country basis to support the TTL. The TTL is really the one that's leading the engagement, obviously. And outreach. I would love to do something at spring meetings.
Please
if
do.
we get time. And
Even for us. I think even for somebody like me who has really very little understanding, specifically on CERP, when we do 80 maybe.
And Jack was talking about a CMU-wide like BBL on.
Please.
Great.
I'd love to work with you on that. Exchange information. Thank you.
So we're a few minutes over. I don't know, any last,
Judy had one.
Judy?
Yeah, okay, we are over the time now. So I think I have a question because Laura and I are now working for a new CERP for Cameroon, and it's my first time working on CERP. And knowing the EP&R or how, if we do that type of work for CAT-DDO and CERP, I find CERP because we usually go with MOF or Ministry of Planning, who is our main counterpart, and identify, a couple of PIUs with existing projects. Whereas the regular DRM response, it has its own counterparts like civil defense or a special agency, like in Jordan in this case. And then they trigger another whole set of stakeholders. So we are preparing a CERP very rapidly, only engaging these PIUs. How did you, when the regular chain and this Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning chain come together, how did that coordinate and how does that coordination or difference manifest in the simulations? Because sometimes we have an EP&R ongoing, and we're also preparing to the CERP. Actually, these are two completely different groups of people.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you guys want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, in Burundi, how we are trying to bring both together, and we had now like a new government in Burundi, so we need to do it again. It's saying, okay, who is gonna activate CERP? No, like who needs to make that decision? Who needs to be involved? So if you go up the ladder, it's the same people, no? In the case of Burundi, so there is a national disaster management platform. Now there is a Ministry of Finance. There is the planning people that, at a higher level, they need to decide, okay, these are the priorities we're activating for this much. So I think at that level, they collide, no? It's the same. Then when we go to implementation, yes, it's the PIU, the one that actually will bring it down and operationalize it. But I think if the dialogue gets not at that level, it would be easier to merge. I don't know exactly, your case. We can discuss offline, but that's how it worked for us.
Yeah. So in Burkina, we had a few hiccups, but what we ended up with actually ended up being quite a clever setup, I would say. So we have this DG COP, Direction Générale de Coopération, which is the main counterpart of the bank in the Ministry of Finance. So they actually manage the portfolio. So they are the right strategic decision maker on which projects, when to trigger, et cetera, et cetera. So they come in more from a leadership and strategic involvement role. And our direct relationship is with them. In terms of the PIU, the manual initially was prepared by the PIU for project that closed. So we were looking for another PIU that would be appropriate. And we found one that is mapped to the Ministry of Finance, and it's an emergency response project. So we had other options. We decided not to go with sector-specific options because this needs to be multi-sectoral and it needs to be something that could move quickly. And the fact that this PIU not only was the emergency response project, but also was mapped to the Ministry of Finance, had the right expertise, gave us a lot of comfort. I would say another thing you could do in Cameroon, and I'm not very familiar with the structures, but you could speak to your fiduciary and safeguard specialist. And
Sorry.
She's not here.
Okay.
No.
Yes, you can speak to your fiduciary and safeguard specialists to also just do a quick rapid assessment of PIUs, who has capacity and what would make sense.
So maybe to add on that, that's for the PIU selection, that's what we did. So it was the CMU who, based on all PIU, said, okay, this one is a CERP PIU coordinator. But then we do have like a technical committee of specific sectorial PIUs. Now, in that case, it goes to health. In that case, it goes to education. So we use existing disbursement channels. But the feedback from the CMU was key at the operational level.
No, so thanks, everybody. I think we're gonna have to wrap it up. I can't tell if somebody's coming into the room. We've overdone it by 10 minutes. But thanks again to all the speakers, the lessons, and I do think teams are innovating on the Malawi example. So yes, I'm sure there's a lot of cut and paste, but I know from the global team supporting the regions, we're also trying to help streamline things and share experiences and lessons. So thanks again to everybody. And if you have any follow-up questions, please contact me, Mary, or one of the team members. I'm happy to continue supporting. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks,
Good evening.
everyone.
Bye, guys.
It's